Hi, I'm Mark Newland from CancerBravehearts.com. We are going through some unprecedented times, the likes of which we have never before seen. And what we're all realizing now is just how quickly life changes. I'm sure we all recognize that our lives will probably never be the same again. And maybe we will recognize some of the things that we took for granted before and how we will get those opportunities again and how much more precious they will seem. You know, one of the things I get to do in my seminars is I tell people how getting cancer was actually the best thing that ever happened in my life. Now sure, it wasn't fun to go through it, but let me just explain why I feel that way. Because you really get to feel the pleasures and the joys of the things that you didn't really realise before and you kind of maybe took for granted. Now all the simple things in life, just going out for a meal, we're going to really appreciate that in the future. Now I know people are going through dreadful times and people are dying all over the world. In places like Italy, the lockdown is having such an effect where people are just losing the place altogether and they're getting violent towards each other. Let's hope and pray that these situations change very soon and we get through this. Now, many of us are isolated and sometimes that causes problems and we miss out on the basic pleasures of life. But I want to tell you about a little moment in my life that was very significant, involved isolation. Now, it wasn't self-isolation, it was imposed by ill health that I was going through at the time I was getting a bone marrow transplant. Now I'm just going to read to you a small chapter, a small section from one of the chapters of my book. This was me when I was actually recovering. As you can see, I don't look like the picture of health. But during this particular moment, this is when I got to my transplant stage. And it was the day that I was actually going to go into hospital and never know whether I was going to get out of that hospital or not. And I'd just finished my last radiation and my body was completely withered. And I was supposed to get an ambulance to the other hospital to get the bone marrow transplant. And I was with my mum at the time and I said, "Mum, can we just walk?" It was a short distance, only about a mile, which was a huge amount for me in that particular condition. But I wanted to take in the sights and scenes of places that I'd seen 1,000 million times before, but maybe I hadn't really appreciated them. And I wanted to have that moment once more. So I'm just going to read a small section. Entering the ward, this is chapter 12, the battle commences. Entering the ward, I was greeted by some very angry staff. They had been anxiously awaiting my arrival, and they were beside themselves with worry after hearing I hadn't got on the ambulance they'd sent for me. They had no idea where I'd gone and were about to contact the police. I knew I'd be in trouble and had deliberately never told any staff that I was going to walk back to the hospital. I had taken about 3 hours to get to the ward and they were rightly very annoyed with me. But the truth is that they were unable to imagine the emotional turmoil that was taking place inside of me. I had caused major problems with their medical plans and procedures that they needed to carry out. I realised how foolish I had been and felt quite ashamed that I'd let my team down. But on a positive note, I had never had time to worry about my entry into the bubble. There was simply too much to get done, and the staff weren't in the mood to be sympathetic to my feelings of trepidation. My moments of reflection and pondering was now over, and we were at the business end of this process. The procedure with my brother had been a success, and the bone marrow they had harvested from him was now ready to be administered via the drip. Once this was completed, it was basically straightforward from the medical point of view. They had essentially taken my body back to an embryonic stage where my entire body was virtually reset to default. Once more, and my body would have to develop the ability to create new blood cells from the newly acquired bone marrow. The expectation was that my marrow would find its way to my system naturally and eventually start to manufacture white blood cells that would be normal, eventually to become the same as my own before it malfunctioned so disastrously. This process would take many weeks, and apart from generally keeping healthy vital signs, it would be a case of monitoring my body's reaction to the new marrow and hoping that it would be accepted. It would be a waiting game, and I knew that I was inside of new hope, but there were many hurdles to clear before I would be on the road to recovery. It was a very surreal situation to be in this room, a room that would no doubt be where I would discover what lay in store for my life. As the doses of chemotherapy and radiation had caught up with me, I started to feel so unwell and began to wonder if this may be the last room I would ever see. My new battleground was set. This would be the one where I would go not only toe-to-toe with my physical assault on my body, but a mental one too. My room was about 10 feet wide and maybe 14 feet long, where most of the floor space was taken up with all the pioneering machinery you could imagine, and the airflow unit engulfed the entire wall behind my bed. There were no toilet facilities, and I would need to use the dreaded commode when the call of nature arose. Believe it or not, given all I had been through, this was actually something I'd been desperately unhappy about, as I didn't like the extreme lack of privacy. Since becoming aware of my impending appointment with this type of room, I had been very nervous about it, especially the idea of not being in private when I used the bathroom. The main wall was linked to the hospital was a large and very thick plastic curtain. It wasn't really a bubble anymore. The technology had advanced, and to be more accurate, the bubble was really more of an air-controlled room. This was also a one-way traffic zone, as I wasn't allowed to leave, and the only staff who were fully scrubbed up could enter. This was mainly done just once a day to allow for basic blood taking and general tests. My concern about being in public view whilst using the commode had now completely diminished. I was now a sorry soul, and I could have been put in the middle of Sucky Hall Street again with my mobile toilet and couldn't have cared less. By now I had long lost any semblance of dignity and had scant regard for my privacy. I was a wreck. All I ever had was gone, except some air in my lungs and the knowledge that I was now completely on my own. Except for the unfocused shapes I saw through a blurry sheet of plastic, that were the faces of my loved ones. I could only converse via a telephone system like the ones used by inmates in prisons, but unfortunately, as my throat was now so sore, I could barely talk. I could only listen to their words of encouragement when I had the strength to hold the handset. I soon became very despondent and was conscious that the lack of human interaction was making me feel very much alone. The most crucial thing that I needed to give me strength and courage to keep battling was the all too important backing and support of my family and my friends. This was something that became very difficult, as there's not much that can be done to interact, and therefore friends found it pointless to visit. I of course understood the situation because I was so distressed to be isolated. It must have been hard on those who cared, seeing me in that condition. As the weeks passed, my body deteriorated as I continually vomited and lost all the weight I had previously gained when I was on the steroids. I was unable to do anything to pass the time as my body was in total pain and I had become so very weak. I knew I was losing and the will to keep going was gone. I needed something to keep going. I then got a call from a relative who gave me some words of comfort, and I realised that I had been feeling sorry for myself and letting those who cared down. I instantly changed my mindset and realised how lucky I was to even be at this stage, and recalled all those friends I'd come to know so well and yet lost so very soon. I was still alive, and I owed it to their memory to keep going. Now that little story just tells you how dreadful a situation can be. Hopefully most of us aren't in that situation. And as you can see, I changed my mindset from feeling sorry and disappointed in this situation and complaining about it to realising how fortunate I was. Now many of us today We'll be praying for those in difficult situations. Even my own family, my mother's partner, has been fighting coronavirus. And we all need to think of those that are going through difficult times. But those of us who are just at home or in lockdown, please remember, it's all down to how you view this. You can change it and make it a fun time. I've seen many videos posted on Instagram, people having great times. Some of my favourite tennis players have been posting videos of them training at home and making use of the time and being with family and friends wherever possible. So let's turn this into a positive time and look forward to the great opportunities we're going to have to kind of get back to some kind of normal life in the future and be able to hug our friends and our family and be close to them and be able to do the things that we once took for granted. Life changes so quickly and maybe our lives will never be the same again, but please remember this will make us better and appreciative of the things that we had before. One of my favourite quotations that I made up after being sick for such a long time was when I was in Yosemite National Park looking at one of my favourite views, Half Dome from Glacier Point. And the sun was setting on this majestic monolith, which is one of my favourite views on the planet. And I realised when I looked at that as the sun set, I thought, to appreciate the view from the highest mountain, you must first visit the deepest valley. And I put that on some of my photographs that I took when I was in isolation and I used to give me encouragement for the future. And I just believe that is one of the most personal things for me, is to realise that you only appreciate the good times when you've had it tough. So let's look forward to the future, let's pray for our friends and be available for those once we get through this. Maybe take that little bit of extra time to go and see people who are still going to be isolated. Some of our older people in the community, some friends and family that maybe don't get so many visits, people in hospitals. Let's make a real effort. I'm going to personally do that in my work with Cancer Brave Hearts. I'm going to redouble my efforts to make sure I pay attention to those vulnerable people who are isolated and don't have friends and maybe make more visits to them.